So we've been talking about the subject of hermeneutics in our class, and we got just, let's see, what is this, the 10th? So we got just a few more times together. I'm signed up through the end of November. We're going to look at the book of Job this evening and use some texts out of Job to kind of talk about the concept of properly interpreting the Bible, as we mentioned before. But I wanted to remind us of a few basic concepts and think about a few things that kind of already lend towards the Bible is pretty clear in and of itself when you read it that we've got to take effort to understand it, right? But first of all, what's the biggest hurdle? What's the biggest problem to biblical interpretation? What do we say? Yeah, if you don't read it, you won't be able to interpret it because you won't know what it says. You'll be totally reliant upon what other people are saying it says or it means. And so I know that's really obvious and really simple and really clear, but at the same time, it's a big problem. If you were to poll people and if they were to be truly transparent about their efforts, I'm talking about people who claim that the Bible is the Word of God. If you were to truly poll those people, if you could get 100% of people polled who say the Bible is God's Word, and you ask them, how much do you read the Bible? How much do you study? Do you basically read the Bible every day? In other words, do you read several chapters a day? That would be a yes or no question. The second question could be, do you have a system that you use to go through the Bible, or are you just kind of a hit and miss reader? Like, well, I read over here, then I go over here and read a little bit, and then I go over here and read a little bit, and I'm never really systematically moving through anything. I'm just kind of reading shotgun approach here and there. And so you ask them about their system. Bottom line, what I'm saying is if people were transparent, you'd find out a alarmingly low percentage of people that, number one, read every day. And then of those who do read every day, you would find quite a percentage that don't have any real system of how they read. Not to say you can't go read as a text over here or there or whatever, something you want to think of, then you can, something that, maybe it's a favorite text, or maybe there's a couple things you thought of you want to go look at, but in general, you want to be able to have a system to go through the Bible so that you can put the whole thing together. And so we've talked about that in here, and hopefully if you don't have a system there, that you work on one and put one together to know what it should be like. What something should be that would give you a good grasp of the Scriptures. But then we've talked about texts that are already talked about this concept of biblical interpretation. Take, for example, Acts 17:11. These were more noble than those in Thessalonica in that they received the word of God with all readiness of mind and searched the Scriptures daily whether those things were so. So these Bereans were compared to the Thessalonian Jews, and the Bereans are said to be more noble for what reason? What's the reason?
Search the Scriptures.
Yeah, they received the word with all readiness of mind, then they searched the Scriptures daily whether those things were so. In other words, testing what they heard, and they were going and examining the Scriptures to say, okay, yes or no, this is what it said. This is the truth. This is what I heard. That kind of thing. So that means that they put effort into it. Paul told Timothy, 2 Timothy 2:15, study to show thyself approved unto God, a workman that needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. So it takes effort. It's not just, well, I'm just automatically going to know everything. Well, no, it takes effort. It takes time. It takes diligence. All right, so what I want to do this evening with Job is a few things. But for example, the way some people look at the Bible and look at interpreting the Scriptures, they would preach and say, well, curse God and die, Job 2:9. And you'd look there and you'd say, well, yeah, it says curse God and die. That's what the Scriptures say. But is that what we ought to do? We've talked about this already, but we're going to spend a little more time on it this evening. So in Job 2:9, I might have said Judges a minute ago also. Job 2:9, if I can quote that verse, I can cite that verse, and I can say, the Bible says, curse God and die, Job 2:9.
Go down and do likewise.
Yeah. But what, give me the verse for it, right? So go and do thou likewise. So curse God and die is what it's telling me, but do I need to go do it? But I know it seems ridiculous, but this is exactly the way people interpret the scriptures. Man, got a little wind blower there, little gully washer, as they like. That's my little crafting teacher used to say. Might be coming in that door in a minute there, right? Good thing y'all are a couple rows back. I'm getting splattered. Lost my train. Oh yeah, but that's how people approach the scriptures. It's either A, they don't even give you a verse, they just teach something and say, believe it because I said it, right? Or they go to a verse and seemingly on the surface there's some amount of, yeah, okay, it says that, but, right? So what are some things we need to consider if someone were to tell you, okay, Job 2:9, curse God and die?
Context.
All right, what about the context? What do I need to do or know?
The reason that statement was made, who it was talking to,
Right.
surrounding that, which was totally just that, totally speculative.
Right. All right. Remind me, I'll do John 9:31 later, and it'll throw a whole wrench in the whole works, and some people might even be up in arms whenever I tell them what I'm going to tell them, but anyway, we'll see. But Job, y'all are going to go there now and go, oh, what's John 9 say? What's the wrench in the gears going to be? But Russ is correct, the context. So let's start simply. Who made the statement? Who said, curse God and die? Who made the statement? Did God say it? Obviously. Job's wife. All right, so now we know who's speaking. Job's wife is the speaker of that on that occasion, making that statement. Job's wife is the speaker. Now let's get this panned out. Is that an inspired statement? Be careful. Let's ask this question. Was she inspired when she said it? No, she's not inspired.
When he recorded what she said.
That's right. The writer is inspired when he recorded what she said, meaning this is exactly what was said, exactly who said it, exactly when. And I know this is very elementary, but these are things that these elementary principles apply to any text, any passage, anything, anywhere, anytime, and they stand the test. And they will get people out of error if they're honest, right? They will get people out of error if they're honest, because it's the Bible that converts people. It's the Word of God that converts people. You just have to, they have their mind cleared of all the garbage that they've been fed and taught all their lives that they can't even see the truth. So, first thing we got to say is, okay, who's speaking? All right, so we know it's Job's wife. All right? And I mentioned the fact that she's not inspired, but the record of her statement is inspired. In other words, this is what was said. And we know it's an accurate record. All right? Why? To whom was she speaking when she said, curse God and die? To Job, her husband. Well, that's kind of those are some strong words for your spouse. I mean, those are strong words for anybody, but there's some heat and tension between a couple if that's the kind of conversation that's being had between the two of them, right? Or there's a serious situation, let's put it that way. All right, well, what has happened? Why is she saying this?
Because the pain of losing all of her children, all of their income, basically, because all their livestock is gone.
Yeah.
And only let her go and she served.
Yeah, so pretty much their lives got turned upside down. inside out, and then squashed a little. I mean, seriously. There's one thing that I think we have to be careful with when we talk about the book of Job that I think some people, if we're not careful, we can easily fall into a trap. And that is, regardless of the right or wrong actions that were taken by Job, his wife, or the three friends, or anyone else for that matter, what Job and his wife faced was horrendous. Period. Like, that fact doesn't change. That's a fact regardless of their reaction to what happened, right? What they faced was horrendous. And we got to get that in our minds and think about it. All right, so now let's go back, and instead of prodding you for all these answers, let's start in Job 1. Let's just read some, kind of get through here and see what we can. By the way, if you want an outline of Job real quick, I can give you one. It's really simple. It breaks down into other parts too, but basically you got the prologue 1 and 2, speeches 3 through 41, and the epilogue 42, and then you can break that down. And I can give you this later. If you want to, just come see me. But then the speeches, that breaks down to Job and his friends 3 through 31, Elihu 32 to 37, God 38 through 41. So that speeches 3 through 41 has 3 parts in it. And then in the Job and his friends, there are 3 cycles of his friends, or well, Job and his friends. And so I can give you all that if you want it. But anyway, just a simple outline of the book. But what you want to remember about Job is that you don't know what you're talking about when it comes to the book of Job if you're not basing what you're saying out of the truths found in chapter 1, 2, 40, and 41, 42. In other words, if you're not aware of what happened in 1 and 2, 40 through 42, and you're talking about what goes on in 3 through 39, you're probably not getting the right picture. You're probably not painting the right picture. I'm going to say it this way, there's a really big chance you're missing the boat. So, chapter 1, verse 1, there was a man in the land of Uz whose name was Job, and that man was perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil. And there were born unto him 7 sons and 3 daughters. His substance also was 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, and 500 yoke of oxen, 500 she-asses, and a very great household, so that this man was the greatest of all the men of the east. And his sons went and feasted in their houses, every one his day, and sent and called for their 3 sisters to eat and to drink with them. And it was so, when the days of their feasting were gone about, that Job sent and sanctified them, and rose up early in the morning and offered burnt offerings according to the number of them all. For Job said, it may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts. Thus did Job continually. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present it. So the scene shifts, right? We saw a summation of who this Job character is, an introduction, very brief introduction. And now we're shifting to the scene before God. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, doth Job fear God for naught? Hast not thou made an hedge about him and about his house and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. But put forth thine hand now and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, behold, all that he hath is in thy power. Only upon himself put not forth thine hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. And there was a day when his sons and his daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And there came a messenger unto Job and said, the oxen were plowing, and the asses feeding beside them, and the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them away. Yea, they have slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another, and said, the fire of God is fallen from heaven, and hath burned up the sheep and the servants, and consumed them, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another, and said, the Chaldeans made out 3 bands, and fell upon the camels, and have carried them away. Yea, and slain the servants with the edge of the sword, and I only am escaped alone to tell thee. While he was yet speaking, there came also another, and said, Thy sons and thy daughters were eating and drinking wine in their eldest brother's house. And behold, there came a great wind from the wilderness, and smote the four corners of the house, and it fell upon the young men, and they are dead. And I only am escaped alone to tell thee. That's a lot. That's a lot to process. Just even reading it, much less being the person whose people that was involved.
When you think about it, Joe, I think about the severity. A person loses a child, and it changes them completely. But when you talk about you lose multiple children all at once. I can't even begin to imagine.
Well, and imagine in saying it like this, losing a child is horrendous. One child. Losing several of your children is horrendous even to a different degree because of the multiple children. But all of your children, when it's multiple. All of your children. And so, now, we'll come back and go through some more of this. But verse 20, Then Job arose and rent his mantle and shaved his head and fell down upon the ground and worshipped. Wow. And said, Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. So then you got chapter 2. So, chapter 1, you got the first round of afflictions, let's say. And basically everything that was external to Job's person. You know, Satan couldn't put his hand on Job, but he could touch everything around Job, and he did. And I want to ask you a question. I'm not asking for an answer out loud on this one. I often do ask for answers out loud, but on this one, I'm not necessarily. When Job said, the Lord gave and the Lord hath taken away, let me ask you this question. Was the Lord behind the taking away of those things? If you would say yes, the only way you could say yes is in he allowed it. It's the only way you could say it is he allowed it.
Something I like to think about as well is that, you got to put yourself in Job's point of view. He didn't hear the conversation that God had to say. He didn't hear my faithful servant and all those incredible things.
Yeah.
And then the next part of, testing. And so from his point of view, if you think about it, when the servants came to him, they said, let's say something, fire from heaven, what it was?
Fire of God. They called it the fire of God.
Yeah, fire of God. And so they perceived it as that way. And so based on their perception, somebody could say, well, it came from God.
Right.
It just came from the sky.
Right.
So it helps understand why he says that later and why some things he can say later is realizing what Job knew and what was not revealed to him at that time. And being tested from God, being tested by God by allowing Satan to do this, that wasn't revealed to him.
Yes, and one thing you need to remember is eventually Job is rebuked by God for what he eventually said. But what did we just read in verse 22? At that point, what is the record about Job's statements and
He didn't sin.
yeah, he didn't charge God foolishly. Why does it say that? Because later on he does. Some people act like Job 122 applies to Job throughout the entirety of the book, but that can't be the case. Because at the end, God rebukes him. Right?
You rebuke one for one reason, that's what God's doing.
Right. It's not like, well, in all this, he sinned not, and neither did he charge God foolishly. Terrible, Job, terrible. I'm sorry. But that's the progression, or I should say digression of this whole situation. And Job is a great book to really see the principles of hermeneutics in action, because you got to understand timing as well. When was this said? Because Job 1:22, whoa, I don't know how many chapters and verses I was about to put in one passage there, but anyway, 1:22, you got to know when that was said, because it doesn't apply to when God's basically tearing him up verbally, basically dressing him down as in 40 and 41, I think it is. God's rebuking him pretty sternly in there, saying, basically, you need to sit down and pipe down and let me tell you a few things. And the thunder rolls, doesn't it? That's a lot.
That was a good time.
Interesting. So let's go back. I want to read 20 to 22 one more time. Then Job arose, rent his mantle, shaved his head, fell down upon the ground and worshipped, and said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly. And as Russ pointed out, at this point, Job, at the point of what's occurring in Job 1:20 to 22, Job's not aware of why this is happening like we are aware of it when we read through chapter 1. All right, so chapter 2. Again, there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, from whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, from going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil, and still, notice that word, and still he holdeth fast his integrity, although thou movest me against him to destroy him, notice this, without cause. Those two words are monumentally significant, especially when you start listening to these so-called friends. They were friends, but they begin to become something. They let their doctrine, their skewed doctrine and their skewed view of God determine how they basically tear up Job, essentially. That's what I'm going to say about that, and we'll get there. We'll say more about that as we go along, Lord willing. But God just said without cause. In other words, there was no justify. There wasn't a reason that I just realized how it says, the Lord is saying, although thou movest me against him to destroy him without cause. Thou movest me against him. That wording is interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't realized something about that. But anyway. Satan answered the Lord and said, skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. But put forth thine hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. And the Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. So went Satan forth from the presence of the Lord, and smote Job with sore boils, from the sole of his foot unto his crown. And he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and he sat down among the ashes. Then said his wife unto him, dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. But he said unto her, thou speakest as one of the foolish women speaketh. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this did not Job sin with his lips. Now, and don't get me wrong, that statement is not made again about Job. Because Job begins to, as time goes on and as he talks more and more, he begins to say things that he shouldn't have been saying. Because he had a misunderstanding. He allowed his mind to be taken off the path of what really happened. And then, before I look at chapter 3, I want us to look at something about chapter 1. into about the devil and what he's saying there. So God said that, I'm back in chapter 1, verse 8, looking at that part of the conversation. The Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil? Then verse 9 is where I'm really wanting to kind of center in. It says, Then Satan answered the Lord and said, Doth Job fear God for naught? What's he saying?
He worships you because you've given him all this stuff.
All right, which is a polite way of saying you pay him off. You bought him off. Of course he does what you want him to do. He's bought and paid for. That's essentially what the devil is saying. And what else? What other implications are lurking in that statement about maybe others besides Job? What is the devil implying about God himself?
And he's a respecter of persons.
Yeah, that could be in there. What else?
You could say that I think sometimes people misunderstand blessings and obedience. That blessings, as Satan was trying to say, come so that he'll be obedient. In reality, they come following obedience. And so, if that's the case, if you were to try that and apply that everywhere, then basically Job has no reason to fear God whatsoever because he's blessed him and taking care of him. In reality, he's doing that based upon his obedience, not the other way around. You know? Almost like he doesn't fear God for anything.
Right.
No good reason, basically.
One of the things that we've said in this discussion is that I believe the Bible reveals a couple of major things that are we can distill it down to a few basic principles, and that is the Bible reveals the identity of God, it reveals the will of God, and it reveals the nature of God. In other words, I'm not saying there aren't any other, obviously there's a ton of other things revealed in the Bible, but those three things are centrally important to what the Bible reveals. The identity of God, in other words, who is he? Who is this being that you say is God? What does that mean? What is his nature? What is his will? Nature meaning what's he like? As in, is he this? Is he that? Is he what? And then his will, in other words, what does he expect of us? And so when you look at what the devil is saying about Job's service to God, what does it imply about the value, about the nature of God? About whether or not he's worthy to be praised and worshipped. What is he saying? What does his statement imply? The only reason you would be worshipped by anyone is because you pay them off. In other words, you in and of yourself, not based on what you do to a certain person or whatever, but you in and of yourself, you're not worthy of worship. And the only way someone would worship you is if you gave them a bunch of stuff. And I think that helps us consider, well, how do we look at God? Because that's what the Bible is going to do, is help us better understand who God is, what is he like, and therefore help us better prepare for the judgment. And that's really what our job is in life, is properly live to prepare for the judgment, in a way of putting it.
He kind of paints Job as if he could only be faithful to God because of what he can get out of these situations.
That's exactly it. I mean, as far as the devil is saying it, God is basically the mafia kingpin, and Job is just a henchman or something that's under this kingpin or whatever, and it's like, yeah, well, I'll help him out because he gives me stuff. We're good because he always makes sure I have what I want. Is that who God is? Is that how Job looked at God? That's not how Job looked at God. But what I'm saying is the devil's question is an affront to the very nature of God. And thus God said, he's in your hand, here he is, this is what he's done, this is who he is. You see if that's why he worships me. And I think that's something that I think that's something that we all have to grapple with, is understanding that that's who God is. God is the God you read about here that said to the devil, who paints God in this other picture, God is the one that said, my servant is faithful to me because he understands these things. The devil says, he just serves you because you give him stuff. And we have to ask ourselves, why do I worship God? Why do I serve God? And I know it's hard to answer this question, but we need to ask it anyway and consider it the best we can. If I went through what Job went through, how would I look at God? Because that's what the Bible is, and that's what hermeneutics is understanding how to interpret the Bible. But when we understand how to interpret the Bible, we're going to understand the nature of God. We're going to understand the will of God. And thus, we're going to understand who we need to be like. So I just wanted to point that out as far as, bring it up. I know you thought of it before, but just us talk about it together. That Job is being pictured as, by the devil, as, he serves you because you pay him off. And look at verse 10. Hast not thou made a hedge about him and about his house and about all that he hath on every side? Thou hast blessed the work of his hands, and his substance is increased in the land. He'll put forth thine hand now and touch all that he hath, and he will curse thee to thy face. Not true. Because he didn't. And that's one thing that Job never did. He did speak erroneously, but he never cursed God. He did sin in what he spoke, but he never cursed God. Which is what his wife, interestingly, said specifically to do. There's not an accident there that the devil is saying, he'll curse you to your face. And then the wife said, curse him.
Which begs the question, was she unknowingly used as a temptation for him to give up already?
Well, and that's the thing is, if I give up as an individual, or I get to this point of, just giving in to something, I become a tool of harm to those around me. And that's what happened to her. She became a tool of destruction to be used against Job in her state of being at that time. And he said to her, you speak as one of the foolish women. Because isn't what she said foolish? It certainly was. All right, but then look at chapter 2, that same interchange, God and Satan. So it says, hast thou considered my servant Job? There's none like him in the earth, verse 3. Perfect and upright man, one that feareth God and escheweth evil, and still he holdeth fast his integrity. Satan answered and said, skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life. In other words, Satan accuses Job again and names the new price. He says, you get serious about his life and he'll change. He'll break. But put forth thine hand now and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse thee to thy face. The Lord said unto Satan, behold, he is in thine hand, but save his life. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. And he took him a potsherd to scrape himself withal, and he sat down among the ashes. And then let's read verse 9. Then said his wife unto him, dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die. I want you to picture this. So they've already lost all that they lost, chapter 1. Their children, everything, basically. Now there's this other conversation And now Job gets stricken with boils from head to toe. And this is part of what no doubt Job's wife is seeing that causes her this reaction, and that is sometimes people have bad reactions because the people they love and care for are hurt. She not only lost her children, but now she's witnessing her husband suffer physically. And that has an effect on her. Again, she doesn't respond properly, but I'm just saying it has an effect on her. And one thing we got to realize is that grief, severe grief can be I don't know exactly how I want to say what I'm trying to say. I'm going to say it like this, though. Severe grief can, and I'm obviously no grief counselor or any such kind of thing, don't claim to be, but severe grief can be a terrible thing, can cause such harm to the individuals enduring it, and it can lead them into bad directions if they're not careful. But what I'll also say is this: if you're outside of a situation or one step removed from a situation where someone is going through severe grief, it would be better to be supportive and not rail on the person because of their grief, right? And that's what happens to Job eventually. I mean, you can't really say it between Job and his wife because they're both going through the grief. But when the friends show up, I feel like those three friends are representative. I know they were actual people. I'm not saying that they're some kind of allegory or something. I'm saying that they do wind up representing the way a lot of people can be if they're not careful. But, so what I was getting at is Job is sitting there and he's taking a potsherd. So, you just picture this jagged piece of clay or pottery or whatever. And he's literally digging in his skin where these these sores are, these boils. Because that's giving him some level of relief. I mean, he's not doing it because it's like super painful and it doesn't provide him anything good, right? He's not saying, well, I'm going to make this worse. He's digging in there. It's providing him some sort of relief. But my point is this. He's at that point where he's lost everything. And not only has he lost everything, but now he's at the point where physically his body, so you think about the systems of your body. So he has processed mentally more than most people ever have to consider in their entire lives by listening to what he heard, what happened and what he saw happen to his family and everything. So he's processed mentally, just overload. Now the nerves in his body are relaying to his nervous system is now firing on all cylinders, if you will. His nervous system is now reporting to his brain, this hurts. Yeah, I mean, you can't just say it doesn't hurt when it does, right? I mean, you can ignore pain to a degree and deal with it, endure it, but still, that doesn't change the fact that his nervous system is firing off, reporting to his brain, there's irritation here, there's a problem, there's pain, such that he's now digging in his skin with a potsherd. But he mentally kept the position of, I don't know exactly what's going on. God gave, God takes away. All I know to do is worship God. And I think that's a pretty big point, is that at the end of the day, sometimes you don't know what's going on. You just have to say, well, I'm just going to keep worshiping God and doing what I know is right. I don't know what's going on exactly, but I'm going to just worship God. So now let's look at his friends, verses 11 and following, chapter 2. Now when Job's 3 friends heard of all this evil that was come upon him, they came everyone from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite. He's, by the way, the shortest guy in the Bible. Did you know that? Bildad Shuhite. I mean, that's pretty short. It's okay, you'll get it. And Zophar the Naamathite. That's what people say whenever people aren't laughing at their jokes when they get them anyway. All right, for they had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. Second tallest is Nehemiah, by the way. It's right here. Nehemiah. I don't know whose knees, but somebody's knees. Well, let's ask this. Let's give the friends some credit. What did they come to do, according to verse 11?
To comfort him and mourn with him.
To come to mourn with him and to comfort him. You can't fault that purpose. But what ensues, you can't fault. And what we'll get. Verse 12, when they lifted up their eyes afar off and knew him not, they lifted up their voice and wept, and they rent every one his mantle and sprinkled dust upon their heads toward heaven. So they sat down with him upon the ground 7 days and 7 nights, and none spake a word unto him, for they saw that his grief was very great.
It's interesting it says they knew him not. They were his friends, but they didn't recognize who he was anymore.
Yeah.
That's pretty intense.
I mean, imagine if I got sores all over my face and my head, and it's like, I don't know, is that you, or are you like I mean. But what did they come and do once they got there? What does it say they did once they got there?
They said they're selling him for 3 days.
Yeah, they sat down with him, a week it was, I think. They sat down with him, and they were silent. You know, sometimes that's all you can do. Sit and be silent. There isn't anything to say. And that's what we want to do, I think, oftentimes, is we males, we have a tendency to want to fix everything, right? We want to fix it. And sometimes there isn't a fix. Sometimes it's just a help. And so they have a great purpose, and they start off in a great way. They just sit there, and just the fact that they're there. I'm sure Russ was taught some of the same things, but whenever I was in preaching school, that's what they told us. They said when you're in local work and you know people there that loses someone close, this is where you have to make a judgment call. I'm not of the opinion, I'll interject something here. I'm not of the opinion that someone who doesn't necessarily isn't close with you, but they just show, that you just get flooded with people. Some people don't want to be flooded. They want to just they don't need the overstimulation. But the bottom line is, of those people who are close, just go and be there. Don't say anything. Just be there. Don't say anything. And that's what they did at first. That was a good response. But then their self-righteousness got in the way. And they started trying to tell Job why and all this. But look at chapter 3. Well, it's basically time. Man, 9 o'clock. That's what it felt exactly like it was 9 o'clock, but it's only 8 o'clock. Been feeling that way all week for some reason. It'll be sometime, and I feel like it's just an hour later than that for some reason. But, so Lord willing, next time we'll pick up with Job 3. It's called Job's soliloquy, in other words, speech to himself. If you talk to yourself, that's what you're doing, is you're soliloquizing. Don't tell people you're pontificating, because that means you're basically being an arrogant soliloquizer that's annoying everyone. But you're soliloquizing if you talk to yourself. You're not pontificating. Don't do the pontificating. Job basically just, Job chapter 3 is just Job breaks his silence and just starts talking. Which that's what eventually happens in grief. There is an eventual just outpouring of some way. And that's what Job's doing. And so, Lord willing, we'll pick up there next time. And there's some other things that'll help us look at proper biblical interpretation as we move along.